So, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do this afternoon. It's going to be slightly different from yesterday, I guess. So, Seth has to leave at 2 p.m. So, I'm going to talk for around 45 minutes. So, we're going to take a break at 10 to 2 so we can send Seth away. Then we kind of probably come back just after 2. And in the first portion, so until 10 to 2, I'm going to talk about different organizational models in terms of how user research is conducted in the industry. And I thought that might be interesting one. We could get some thoughts on it as well, since it's here now, as well as probably the framework, user research framework that Seth mentioned, the chapter. So if we have enough time, I'm going to quickly go over that again so we can have his comments on it. After the break, after he's done, we're going to look at some of the report examples, and hopefully we're going to see how the stuff that Seth mentioned in terms of being specific, being persuasive, you could see how those reports were generated to achieve that, or try to achieve that. I know I promised we're going to have a quiz. We will have a quiz. That's after we send Seth away. And then, yeah, I think we're probably going to continue in the same time frame as yesterday, so we're probably going to finish around 4. That's good? Okay. Cool. So, okay, a couple of things I wanted to remind you guys, because I feel from some of the questions that you guys asked yesterday and some of the things we discussed today, I just wanted to remind you of different type of evaluation that we do. And being a grad student, your mind is kind of towards more, I would say, experimental type of evaluation. And I wanted to kind of, I know Seb also talked about it, so I wanted to clarify it a little bit more. So I think the simplest way, and I didn't make this up, is from one of the main HCI textbook that kind of distinguished this evaluation in different types. So there are evaluations that would involve the user, kind of make sense, we invite someone to come to the lab for the game, so it could be in a lab, so you have a control setting, often happen in a lab setup at the company or at the university, or you would conduct the same type of evaluation in terms of involving users, but you would do it in their natural setting. So let's say if you are maybe design the interface for the new public transport things here so people can buy ticket, you can install that and then you can go and watch people using it and then try to figure out what are the issues. And obviously there are benefits to both of this. So in the control setting, obviously you can control more factors, but you may kind of bias the users because, or bias the data you are collecting because it's a very controlled environment. Again, coming back to our kind of a ticket machine idea, you can even bring it here and test it here, but then you may not have the real world scenario where it might be raining or it might be too sunny or there are like 5 people queuing behind the users and then it's going to add more pressure on them how to use the interface. So those are like kind of the difference between these two. Then we would have type of evaluation that won't involve users, and we often refer to them as predictive evaluation. So you kind of predict that what would happen if a real user would use the system. So the type of like most of the expert type of evaluation models would probably fit under this. So if you're talking about heuristic evaluation, that's more like a predictive model. Obviously, there are ways to kind of combine the two together, but we don't talk about them too much. The other thing that I wanted to clarify again, kind of differentiating between what probably most of you are thinking, which is on an experimental side, type of evaluation, and what we are talking about in game user research, at least the way the industry in most cases approaches it, which is to me is more on a like a usability side, if you want to go by the definitions from the HCI textbook. So in experimental studies, you usually have a hypothesis that you want to discover and you want to study, and often try to investigate the relationship between one or two things, or two or three things, or two or more things. Yeah, that's what's it. So, for example, you may have a, I don't know, you may have a control that you are using, you're comparing if users would control the game using a new, I don't know, brainwave system, or using a traditional controller, or using a, I don't know, Xbox controller. So you want to evaluate the performance. So you have a measure that you try to, you have a couple of variables that you are trying to measure, and you have a couple of conditions, and then everything else stays the same. So then you prove that, for example, although using the brainwave to control the game is not as fast in terms of performance, but maybe people had fun doing that. So that might be something that you contribute to the board. In usability testing, we usually refer to them as applied experimentation. So developer basically use that to check if the system that they are designing is working, and if the users can use it. And there are also hypotheses here, but those hypotheses are usually around the system that the developers are developed. So they are trying to answer questions about their system. So I had this kind of nice table again from one of the popular HCI books that kind of differentiate the two. So if you are looking at experiments for research, so this is most likely what you do for your master or PhD. So you're trying to discover new knowledge often, so you have a hypothesis that you want to prove. But in usability testing, your focus is not on discovering new knowledge. Your focus is often to improve a particular product. So in our case, if you are working on a game which is still under development, we are not trying to invent a new thing or fix the first problem. We are focused on fixing something with that particular game. In experiment research, to discover that knowledge, you often need many participants. So when you decide your experiment, you often think of like, oh, I'm going to have like 60 participants, they're going to do this and that. In usability testing, relatively, you have often fewer participants, so maybe around 12, around maybe 20, depending on the type of question you are answering. Again, in experiment research, you want your result to be validated statistically. So you are looking at, oh, what if I have a null result? Can I prove this situation is better than the other situation? And that's not the case when we are doing usability type of research, because our results are there to inform the design rather than prove a new knowledge. So that's why, I guess in most cases, we are not necessarily using a statistical significance and things like that to try to come up with an iteration on our design decision. In experiment research, we, as academics, we always talk about, you want to run a study or design a study that's replicable. When you write a paper, you always include a section on, I use this computer, this was the room setup, this was how I recruited partners. So everything is there, and the reason you include them is because if someone else wants to run a similar study, they should be able to get a similar result. So what you find should be replicable. And obviously that's not the case when you are running a usability testing. In most, quite often, that your result is not your study is not replicable. It's just based on that particular game and that particular time that you are testing it in that particular question that you are trying to answer. And usually no one else would use that result apart from the developer of the game. And that kind of define again, experiment setup, you try to control all the conditions kind of strongly, where in usability testing, some conditions are controlled as much as possible, but there are also maybe some flexibility around that. For experimental research, you often have a very rigorous experimental design, where in usability testing, we often have procedures that we plan and we follow. And finally, which I think is also something that's emphasized a lot on it, is that when you run an experiment, your contribution is often a scientific report that you write for a scientific community. So you add that knowledge to the board. When you run usability tests, you report the result to the developer. If they don't use your result, you wasted all your time. That's what we talked about it earlier. So I thought maybe having this table and thinking about it in this way in your mind can separate what you are doing for your master thesis or PhD thesis or when you write a high paper or whatever, it's often fit in this area. When you work for a game in a commercial setup to evaluate it, you are often talking about this stuff. Again, not always, but most cases. Any questions on this? Again, you guys, feel free to contribute if you don't agree or want to add more. No? Cool. So, let's move on to the. So the next thing I want to talk about is how user research done in production. So that's the second chapter in the games user research book written by Veronica Gamito from EA. And it kind of discusses the part that I'm going to focus today is how different companies, different studios set up their user research team. And the reason I wanted to talk about it because I think it's important for you as it helps you to prepare yourself for the job that you are aiming for. Knowing when you, for example, if you have an interview with Ubisoft, knowing their organizational structure in terms of a user research team would help you to know how to prepare for that job. Also would help you, knowing this would help you to know which companies you want to go based on things that you are excited about or you think you can contribute more. So as hopefully we established by now, we said that many companies, big companies, studios, not even small, they have their user research team. So all the big ones, I would say, Microsoft, Sony, EA, Warner Brothers, Ubisoft. There is often a dedicated team of researchers that their job is to run user research on the game that the studio is developing. As well as there are companies like Player Research, that, and some other companies that they offer it as a service, as what we talked about earlier. So again, differentiating between these type of jobs that you can get, also define how you would prepare for them. In terms of the organizational structure, I would say each of these studios or company, they have probably their own way of structuring things, but what's kind of consistent is the core responsibility and the execution of things. So it's often quite similar. I'm gonna skip over this table because that kind of talks about how many user research staff are working at these companies. And this data is a few years old, so I expect probably a little bit more. What's maybe interesting here, I can point out to, is you see in companies like Ubisoft or Riot, they have more user researchers than other companies, and I'm going to explain why that's the case in those companies. And again, Audrey is coming tomorrow, so we can chat to her about this as well. So who does user research? Again, we touched on it a little bit this morning. They come from a variety of backgrounds. Most of them are graduates from fields such as psychology, computer science, or human-computer interaction. And the skill set is the ability to basically define that hypothesis, design a study to be able to study that question, collecting data, analyzing the data, as well as reporting the data. So that's kind of a simplest probably way to talk about the skills that you need, and obviously there are more depths to each of them. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is the set of responses. You can kind of organize them in two groups in terms of the roles in the user research team. So you either work as a researcher, which I expect most of you in this room will probably targeting these roles, a researcher role, or you can also be a support staff in the team. And obviously, the research role, your primary job is to perform the study, collect the requirements, collect the data, run the study, analyze the data, report the data, so everything research related. Associated role, you would often start as a moderator and kind of or analyst, which your responsibility would be often involving it would involve kind of conducting the test, collecting the data, and help you with analyzing the data. And kind of a slightly higher level after that would be a researcher, which you would design the study and do the reporting. So if you kind of are a fresh graduate, you probably would look for a moderator job. If you have a few years experience, you probably go for the analyst and then maybe researcher. Again, different companies would handle this differently. So I think player research is not, you guys, do you have moderator or not? You all have researchers?
No, we're all research roles. We might bring in interns for a few days and maybe a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But otherwise we're all research level.
Yeah. And then in terms of the support, so basically you would take care of all activities related to conducting the research. So associated role would be recruiter. So you would basically handle the participants database, kind of screening them, inviting them to find the suitable participants, inviting them to take part in the test, obviously in collaboration with the researchers. Or as a lab technician, so you basically manage the equipment, ensure all the software are working, all the builds are installed properly, and things like that. So you could kind of see the differentiation between these roles. Again, yes, most of you in this room are probably targeting the research roles. So something to consider is, depending on the size of company that you are joining, you may have to do all of these yourself. So when I was working as a solo user researcher, for example, for execution lab, I had to do all of them. I had to design a study, I had to recruit my own participants, write my own thing. I had help sometimes from interns and things like that, but I was doing all of them as a single person. In bigger companies, you probably have separate role, and I think in player research there are people who their only job is to recruit. You probably have lab manager that their only job is to make sure that the lab is working, all the systems are working, and then you have researcher who's dedicated to doing the research part. So obviously, kind of there is, as again, someone who may want to start in this field, there are kind of consideration you need to make on what type of company you want to join. So would you join a new indie developer that is one a user researcher? Then you have to do all of this together, which kind of means that you probably learn about all the process really fast, but at the same time you cannot do many things. So you're going to be very slow in running the studies and organizing everything, but you're going to do everything yourself. Vice versa, if you are going for a bigger company, you probably rely on other people to do part of the job, and you kind of focus on something specific. So, in terms of organizational models, again, this is, I think, written by someone from EA, as I mentioned, Veronica, probably designed towards bigger studios or written by that lens in mind. But I think it's kind of probably generalizable to other studios as well. So there are three organizational models that was discussed in the chapter. The centralized model, decentralized, and a hybrid model. And I'm going to go and explain what are these, what are the benefits to each of these models. Again, this would help you to understand when you are applying for a job, how to prepare yourself, or which of these type of organizational model would maybe work better for someone who is starting in this industry. So in a centralized model, as the name suggests, there is one single team of user researcher that they are responsible for doing all the research activities that happens in the company. So these researchers, they probably work on diverse projects, and they have their own office, their own desks that are separated from the developers. They may even have their own building. And I think somehow probably kind of consulting services would look like a centralized model. So there is a team of researchers that they are working with developers, but they are not necessarily part of the development team. They are kind of separated from that. So there are benefits to this organizational model. The most important thing I would say is that this team of experts, they can share their knowledge, learn from each other, create best practices and have that strong relationship among themselves as researchers. Which is good because that means as a research personnel here, you have an opportunity to kind of go higher level in your job. So you may start as a moderator, and then you become an analyst, and you become a researcher, you become a senior researcher. So there is a kind of very clear path that you can improve. And often that means that people who are using this model, they kind of stay at the studio because that they have a growth path there. And the other cool thing is, since these guys work together and talk to each other, there is loads of opportunity in terms of learning, advancing their processes, as well as optimizing what are the better way to do research. So, to me, kind of this suggests if you are kind of new to this field, this is probably a model. Again, you can argue about that, but that's probably a model that you want to start because you're going to be part of a bigger team, and you have loads of support from your immediate colleagues. And as an organizational, thinking as an organization as a whole, this model means there are going to be loads of shared resources. So you may have your own building, you may have lab for yourself, you may use a similar tools. So there are loads of resources that the organization would provide, and all of the researchers would have access to them. However, obviously there are some limitations to this model as well. The main one, again, think of a bigger studio that may deal with like publishing or developing 30, 40 games at a time. There is always the kind of exercise of reprioritizing. So because you have one team of researchers, so you may need to allocate them to projects that are more important. So there could be a case that there are some games that don't get enough attention because all your researchers are busy working on your major titles. And that's one of the limitations of having this centralized approach. The other one, which I think it's one of the kind of another main limitation of the system, is there need to be loads of work to establish a better relationship between the researcher and developer. So if you are not part of the development team, you need to spend more time on understanding the game better and talking to the developer, because you don't know, you are not kind of attending the development meetings where, so you need to learn about what decisions were made, what sort of documentation are available to you to have access to. So that relationship building can be a challenge in centralized model. So according to the book, again, I didn't make this myself, but the book suggests that the studios such as Microsoft, they use centralized approaches. Probably know them better. And that's, I think in the Microsoft case, the cool thing is Microsoft user research team is probably one of the strongest teams. Because they have loads of researchers, they have loads of resources allocated to them, and they publish loads of papers. So if you actually like 2 of the key papers in the user research field, I would say it's written by Microsoft research team. There's one called Player-Centric Design. I think that's one from 2009 or 2010, and a new version of it which was published in 2018. There are amazing papers. I will share them on the slide, so you should definitely check them. And that's the beauty of this centralized model, because you talk to each other, you write papers, you involve or invent new things. In decentralized model, so as the kind of the little picture suggests, we have researcher or user researcher being part of the development team. So there is no one centralized team. So you have basically multiple independent user research departments or individual across the company. That basically means there is often less mandate, or not as strong organizational mandate in the centralized model. But on the other side, that means the individual researchers have the flexibility to, and then the freedom to conduct their research in the way that they feel it may fit their projects better. So in terms of the kind of positives, you have your researchers highly kind of sensitive to the needs of their actual project. So they are part of the development team, they go often to all the meetings, so they have a really good knowledge on what's going on with the game, so they can be very sensitive to the needs of that specific game and a specific group. And that also helps with the communicating between the developers. So part of, in the morning presentation, what Seb emphasized a lot in terms of that on-time thing, so knowing what you can suggest, when you can suggest, when to conduct each study, and you could decide on those if you know the development very well, and that's in this model, so you kind of know the development very well. You are going to all the development meeting, you know which person is responsible for fixing what, so you can go to them and like, okay, you fix this. So that's much easier in this model. And yeah, so basically kind of following that, so the researcher's knowledge of the game is deep, and the design intention and the suggestion that he or she may make is quite contextualized for that game. And often there is not much of issue in terms of prioritization of the projects because you have a researcher working on that project. So that person is dedicated to the project, so you always have the team involved. However, as we're going to talk later, there might be a challenge in terms of sharing resources because it would be very expensive if each game or each team development would have their own like user research lab and things like that. So in terms of limitation, you need more researchers. So if you have 30, 40 games, you need probably 20 researchers because you have them working on those games. So that's more headcount, basically. I think one of the challenges would be these guys. Each of them may come up with their own processes. So how do you make sure that that process inside the studio is kind of consistent? Could be a bit of a challenge because these guys have the flexibility to do things that they wanted. Also, there is a limitation in terms of mentorship and learning. So if you just graduate and then you become a researcher who works in this model, you may be left alone in one of these teams and you don't have much opportunity to talk to other researchers and get help from them. So I would say if you are joining so maybe joining a studio with a decentralized model might not be your first approach when you graduate. When you have more experience and you want more flexibility, that might be an exciting model for you. And again, as an individual, because you don't talk to other people, you may have less time to iterate and reflect on the studies that you do because you don't see how other people are doing. And the issue is kind of duplicating the resources that we already talked about. And again, remember, like when the book was written, an example of decentralized model was Ubisoft, but I guess they are also kind of moving toward more like a hybrid model, which we're going to talk about. So in a hybrid model, there is a kind of a centralized team that they work together, so they have the benefit of that mentorship and a strong relationship among researchers, but each of the team members also assigned to a particular project. So they kind of can come back and get support from their colleagues, but they also have that specific knowledge about that specific project. So kind of the best of both worlds may happen in the hybrid model. So obviously, as the pros of that would be unified best practices that they could apply and they could use. Everyone would have access to the technologies and resources and things like that, as well as the opportunity to build that relationship or a stronger relationship between the game dev teams is existent. In terms of the kind of the limitation, there is still need to kind of work to be done or focused on building that relationship both with the development team and with the core research team. And these are like two examples of this according to the book of hybrid model that was given, and that kind of probably makes sense in the headcount that we looked at. So Ubisoft has the highest number of user researchers, probably because currently they're looking at more decentralized approach, though I know that they're moving towards hybrid model. Cool. So I think, again, hopefully this will help you to kind of plan when how you want to kind of approach finding jobs. Also, kind of give you a perspective on if you have a, let's say, interview with Microsoft, what sort of questions you probably going to be asked and how to prepare for those in compared to Ubisoft, so on. And I think I like to kind of comment on this a little bit because I think your perspective would be interesting.
I think you've done an expert job on explaining them. Having only worked in a centralised or equivalent of a centralised role, of course we're on microphone. Having only really worked in a centralised role, right? I can't really talk to the value of a hybrid. Of course, thinking about our metrics from earlier this morning, our data is going to be significantly more actionable if we're closer to the team. It's going to be significantly more persuasive if we can understand the traits of the team, who's worried about what, and biases, let's say, of individual stakeholders. So there are certainly advantages and disadvantages too, but there's disadvantages-wise, the longer you spend with an individual team, if you've been around for 3 years, is your insights trustworthy? I don't know. I imagine that changes over time. So I think this does tie back directly to the type of data you produce, and by extension, some of the compromises you might have to make or these concessions you might have to make in the methodologies you run.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to me, having that the team that you can rely on and receive support in a centralized model, I think that's quite important. But on the other side, building that relationship is important. And in terms of retaining talent, so one of the things that we said, and when I talked to my colleagues when I talked to some of my colleagues in the game industry as user researcher, one thing that I'm becoming actually more interested in it is the quality of life of a user researcher. What would you what makes you stay in that position, and what makes you want to progress in that position? And the issue that I've heard a couple of times in a kind of a decentralized model was that they've been working on one particular game for the last 5 or 6 years, and that could be quite kind of challenging in a way that you only have seen one game. And it could be, I don't want to say boring, but because it's not boring, it's actually quite fun to do this stuff. But it could be like your whole life is working on one particular game. Where in a centralized model, and again, that's why I think a junior researcher should try to join companies in this model, because you get to work on variety of projects, and that's such a experience. You can get such a kind of a useful experience that you won't get in the centralized model. And again, and that's why I think it's important to consider them properly, because I would say decentralized might be good for someone with maybe 10 years of experience that has seen loads of games and has lots of experience, but now want to focus on one particular thing. Where centralized model, you get the opportunity to see many games. And one of the cool things, as I mentioned yesterday when I was introducing myself, I worked for Execution Lab for 2 years as a user research director there. And I think when they advertised that job, so that was a studio in Montreal, they had quite a, I think, difficult time to recruit someone for the role. And they said they had many great candidates. When they talked to them, the challenge was they were very specific on working on only one game or one platform or in one studio. Where, because I spent from 2009 to 2013 as player researcher at the previous company explanations, vertical slice. At the time, I had experience working on probably 20, 25 different titles, different companies, different genres, and for execution lab where they were investing in a wide variety of games, that was a really valuable experience that I could bring to the team, working on these different games, different developer, different experiences, and they saw a lot of value in that. So as someone who's starting, I would say, go work for Flame Research. I mean, if you can get past the hiring process. Anyway, so we have another 10 minutes before Seth has to leave. And what I want to do is to talk about the chapter that he wrote, or maybe he should talk about the chapter he wrote. But maybe I can bring.
Yeah, all right. I mean, it's been a while, but.
I think the part that, I mean, you guys can read the chapter, so that's the main thing. But what I wanted to highlight, there are a couple of, in like 9 minutes now that we have left, actually. So a couple of quick things I want to highlight, and maybe Seth can come here and we can talk about it together. So one thing is, as I mentioned yesterday, and hopefully you heard today as well, one of the hardest things that you need to do is to be able to select the mixture of these methods for your study. So I know that you have had courses that you learn about each individual method. So if I ask you what is observation, what's the benefit of observation, what are the limitations, you all know that. If I say what's the interview, what's think cloud, I think you all know this stuff. But just knowing this on its own is not enough. But what makes this job hard is knowing which combination of these methods you would use to answer the particular question. And these are, I would say, really established basic user research methods. And what I like about this chapter that Graham did is to provide this, I would say, evaluation framework that lets you to decide when to use what method and how to combine them. So there is this model, I think Seth mentioned, and I think what you showed was
I took the middle bit.
Yeah, you showed a slightly improved, like a newer iteration of this model.
Well, you know, it didn't need the top and the bottom.
Yeah, so, but when I actually use this in the courses that I teach, and I think when you talk to developers, when you say, what do you want to get out of the test, the question is always, they want to make money. Like, would people buy my game? And especially if it's a free-to-play model, would people pay to continue playing my game? So, like, usually they were like, and it's funny because when I talk to them, they were like, we know our game is great, but people don't buy it, so can you fix the monetization? And it's like, but they don't notice that monetization is kind of, highest level or end of that journey of experience. Like before, and you can think of your own experiences, before you spend money in a game, a free-to-play game, you need to probably have a good experience with that game. If you don't have a good experience, you're gonna switch game and you're gonna play something else. But to achieve a good experience, there shouldn't be any usability issue that's kind of in your way to have that experience. And to solve or to remove the usability issues, as a player, you need to understand what the game wants you to do. So I think you call it learnabilities or understanding, and it's kind of the same thing.
Yes.
But before any of them, and I think that's why I like this appeal portion as well, that you need to have, there are like, I don't know, thousands of games every day published on Apple Store,
yes,
Apple Store or something.
17 a day on Steam, I think.
Yeah, so there should be something to make you excited to download that game in the first place. So either someone played the game and tell you that, I know you like action RPG and this is the new action RPG, go and play it. And then you probably go to the page and you look at a couple of the artwork or screenshots that are there, watch a bit of video to see if that game is appealing to you. And if it's not appealing, you're not gonna download it. So you're not gonna get, basically kind of now reverse it. To get into the monetization, it's start from really bottom level. And what I probably want you to talk about is this one. So maybe you can go through this diagram.
Can I go back to you first?
Yeah.
You came from the top down and it was perfect, but let's go from the bottom up briefly. You've heard of this idea of No, you're all right.
That's
You've heard of this idea of customer journeys, I'm sure, the idea that we can track an individual's experience of a product over time. So from the moment they first hear of it, we can understand their journey with it all the way to the moment they buy it, and then after they buy it, and they use it for a long time, etc. And you can sort of trace that through this model by going from the bottom up. As Pejman said, our first impressions of a game are controlled. They're designed by the designers, you know, the store page and the front and the copy that's there, or the box art and stuff. So getting those first impressions right, and if we can get through to purchase, we can get the game downloaded, then we get a chance to teach the player what this game is about, and then they get to control it, and then if they can understand it, control it, then they might have fun. And then the top layer, which is where I'm getting to, is over time. So it's monetization, and in fact, I more often refer to this as retention now. Retention is just all of these other factors over time. How does the experience change over time? How does usability change over time? What more am I doing? How do the controls change? What mechanics are added? How does the narrative change over time? What am I having to comprehend? So the top layer is the rest of these layers over time. Okay, which is separate to this one. So if those are the topics that we can look at in research, appeal, understanding, usability, experience, monetization. Those are the topics. With different scope for change amongst each of these over time. We can't change. Development students, it's very tough for them, for example, to strip out all of the game art and replace it with something else because we find that it has poor appeal. Or we find that there are themes that aren't resonating with our audience. We have to completely change the narrative or something like that. You could see how deep that could cut. You can't wait till the end of the development process to find that out. There is an intersection of the time when we can study something and the time when we have time to change it. And that, for some things like appeal, is typically ideally right at the beginning, where we've got the foundations of our product. What is it about? What platform is it? Who is it for? That has to be reasonably solidified up front. And it roughly follows this kind of flow through as well. Understanding and usability, that's about core controls, it's about onboarding, it's about the way that we design that the character should be controlled in the game, what have you, whatever we can do. And that is an iterative process, but usually after we've decided what we're going to make, then we're going to try and make it and iterate through, iterating on understandability and usability. So that's this, I'll come to this diagram in a minute, I'm only talking about this bit for a second. You heard me say earlier that games aren't fun for a long time during development. There's a real risk that they're just rubbish, boring, there's nothing, there's something there but it's not crystallised yet. We have to get quite far into development then before we start dedicating research on fun, like changing the fun, polishing the fun, making the bosses easier or giving the player more lives or the opposite. And then the last thing is monetization. I'm going to talk about retention. There's, again, the last portion of development is just making more stuff, just generating more levels, more content, more modes. So that content generation process comes really reasonably near the end, perhaps, where we can start looking at making more for players to explore. Hopefully, if I've succeeded in telling this story, you've seen a flow from the bottom of this model at the start of development through iterative process in the middle, and then upward through the end, right? Monetization and appeal. Now, you can see that flow. So we've ordered these are all of the different types of methods that player research offers. There's a few more now, but whatever. And they're roughly ordered in when they should be used in development. The greener it is, the dark green ones are really good at exploring these topics. So usability tests are really good at exploring usability. And you can see that upward flow manifest in our methods, in the methods we use. We start off with methods good at appeal. We move up through iteration with collaborative design, with usability expert analysis, to look through usability and understanding over iteration over time. And then as we get nearer the end, we're looking at engagement diaries, long-term retention, analytics, things about people sticking around and how long they're going to play for, this upward momentum. Did it do all right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to mention. So we're not going to go through the whole chapter, but you have it and you can read it. So what you can get from the chapter is where Seb and Graham basically explain what are these individual methods, and they to me, they are a combination of those user research methods. So they talk about what it is, how would you apply it, how many participants you would generally need, how would you report the finding. So they talk about each individual method and they explain when to use it. And I thought I would mention this because I myself found this super useful when I'm trying to think of what type of a study I want to do, because if you're testing a field, you see that, okay, I have basically two options. Either I need a concept test or I need to get a large scale play test. If you want to evaluate monetization, you see there are not many things that look at monetization, but just the engagement diary, because you need players to be involved with the game for a longer period of time for them to decide to spend money. And I think that's very useful.
Do you mind if I make a quick point? Thanks. These methods, we didn't just make them up. We didn't sit down, on an afternoon and just be like, oh, let's make up a new method. But the problem came first. The business risk came first. We didn't know whether people were going to like the game that we were investing millions of pounds into. So a method was designed, in our case, the concept test, to answer that question rigorously and early. So don't put the cart before the horse. The risk came first, the unknown, the uncertainty, and a method was designed to answer that question. Why is that important? Two reasons. One, these are designed to be used, therefore, to answer specific business risks. So you have to understand the risk first. So speak to your stakeholders, all the stuff I talked about this morning. Secondly, risks change. As new platforms, new genres, new audiences arise in game development, we're making more games for more people. It means there needs to be new methods in here. Or at least we need to iterate and change these methods. None of these things are set in stone. So we're running different types of playtests now to what we were a few years ago. We've got different names for some of these as they've changed purpose. And that torch gets passed to you. Understand the problems in your business. Understand the risks that your company's facing. And use your academic study to design methods that deliver good data at that point. Right?
Cool. Thank you so much. So, as I mentioned, we are close to 2 o'clock. We're going to take a quick break so we can make sure that Seth gets his taxi and say goodbye to him. And then we're going to be back, I think, probably 2:15, yeah, or 2:10? Yeah, 2:10, I think, 2:10. And then we're going to go through some important examples.
The tax is coming right. It came from this one. No, thank you.
What's up, Carman? That's your superpower name. You're super, you're like Carman.
What?
Your superhero name is
Oh, man.
Carman. Carman.
Cowman.
Excuse me.
Who's Cowman? I'm the Cowman.
Marvin is the Carman.
Wait, are you speaking? I want to be sheep,
June.
You want to?
Oh,
Can you fly lizard thing? Lizard. Chip. The stands. Not for lights.
Wait, what is the quiz on?
Go to my desk. Oh, is there a quiz going on?
Yeah.
Yes. There will be a quiz.
It's mostly yesterday's stuff.
Does it count?
Oh, man.
Does it count?
We
I don't
It's
think.
probably like
This is because they just need to put something in plus. Yeah, so I still don't have access to copy.
What is it? It's a screen.
Oh, is this your project?
yeah.
What is happening, June?
Hold on.
There's 2 more questions. Hold on. Is it mini club or mini club? Mini what? Mini club.
It's
go to my desk and take an object, show me how you would do it.
This drawing?
Yeah, this drawing. Okay, you get an idea, drawing something. Yeah. That's good.
I put too much way too much sugar in here. It's sweet.
But the benches, you know, this one I need to make some adjustments with the camera, so that they will be like following the benches. Yeah, that's you need some. I still need to work on the camera, whatever they use from your feet, seeing through the headset. But Roy came up with all these four last night. It's pretty easy. It's just another asset that I need to download, and then one of the objects is called camera tray. Just make it an object, like insert it in the project. There's an option here, build and run. So you select the platform, just auto it, and you will build it. Yeah, you can see it. Even if, once you build it, even if you don't pop the headset from the wheel or something, you can still see, like, it runs forever. I needed to power it off in order to stop seeing.
So it's not live from the computer.
No, it
You
is
just build
you build it
onto the.
onto the headset, but you yeah. It's a random stadium. I didn't want to use a real stadium that exists in the world, because then I don't know if that's okay. Well, I don't know if that's okay. Is that, I mean, is that? Probably it's not. That's not the answer. That's not the question.
You mean the design of this?
Like if I use this as stadium that already exists. Yeah.
See you again. It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Sorry, I barely know we can last.
This is the next one. So we're planning to have four more actions. The lights, lighting up the turning on lights.
Are you guys thinking of doing something today?
I don't have any plans. What do you do?
Go to the mall and see how it is.
Why this?
I have no idea what to do.
Rabbit? Did you just say rabbit?
No, rabbits.
Badminton.
I mean,
Badminton.
like,
What is badminton? Video game. Mario Rabbit.
I'm just gonna use this very close. I will get the texture side. But I still need to like download, I don't know. Well, I already have some stuff that you can do. But
Tell me.
an hour ago.
I always miss it. I always miss it, and then
I
I'm
was
glad that I read it at the same time. Okay, yeah, it's just friendly.
dark, something like for
It's
hard.
starting to?
I think it's sort of an hour away. I think it's 2 or 3 actions. For the next 2 weeks. Yeah, for the next 2 weeks.
Should all
I
fly.
will get to
It should be quick.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, like, 2-3 of these lectures, quiz per day.
Oh, quiz.
I think it's gonna give me a chance to stop break to run the study and go to that.
Boarding cafe?
Whatever the
Sounds good.
results are. Why is it?
Why don't you?
Just drop me off at home.
It's like the
Or
same as
tomorrow.
why I'm leaving.
One of those two.
We can go first in the morning and then to the boarding cafe.
All things. Like, this is where I was able to find more applications of rather than just a half.
So how's the break something?
Yeah, how do you
Okay.
understand? Most people.
Oh, okay.
That's true. No, that's true. That's valid.
Yeah, but
Why this? Why? Like why this one? Why this one?
yeah, why do you think
Because yeah, because it's easy to find. It's easy to find in architecture actions.
why?
What do you mean why? How do I answer that why in research? How do I answer that why in research?
I have like my best friend, she always just asks me why
Why?
after everything, and I'll tell her, and then she's like, but why? I don't, not.
Bro, why? Why do you ask why?
Because I don't know why
Do you mind for a key?
why?
Yeah, whatsoever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Whatsoever.
I want to ask if I want to drive from Montreal to here.
Do it.
I don't know.
Wait, can you even drive from Montreal to here after the work day and go get your
Of course not, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know.
But we can like play on Saturday if you want. Because he has a boarding cafe in his house. So
and it's free.
and it's free.
And it's after work. And then he's gonna use like furthermore. He's just gonna throw some fancy words.
That's what you mean.
I actually cut down on the lines or is that just his? I can't tell. I can't tell if I cut down on the lines or if this is not
I don't like this keyword.
casual conversation. I cut down 10 lines. That's just not just nitpicking.
And also, it's like amazing things. Oh, yeah. Also find out that help always. You can also whatever. It's like in every sentence.
Yeah.
The first part is one day, another part is another day. So the first part is that's where I think and the second day is 50 marks. Part of it is short. Count for 1 conversation takes 2.